Hi there. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt. I'm an international teacher. I've been traveling the world for over a decade, living in different countries. So I'd like to base my reflection on assessment and the curriculum just based on my last two schools that I've been at, because I feel they're quite a big juxtaposition, and they're an interesting examination of the two extremes that assessment and the curriculum can go. So I'm going to use Ratnam, Lim and Tam as my first article. I chose this article because it talks about Singapore's education system, and I believe that the article neatly surmises the assessment policies here at my current school. Ratnam, Lim and Tam talk about Singapore's education system as being examination oriented. They talk about how students go through the Singaporean education system and they encounter at least two high-stakes national examinations, one in primary school and one in the secondary school. This in turn causes teachers to be highly focused on testing. They argue that though the high-stakes examinations are taken at the end of the primary and the secondary, teachers at all levels are obliged to drill and prepare students for the examinations. Parents in turn often exert pressure on teachers to focus more on promoting academic outcomes, and they focus less on the holistic development of the child. The general mindset is that academic achievement in mathematics, sciences, and the languages should take precedence over other forms of learning, such as humanities, and other talents such as music, art, and sporting talents. This makes students perceive of learning as passing the examination, sadly, and if possible, passing it by good grades. Now, the current school I work at is BASIS. It's an international school that's based out of China. And just moving towards all of these points, I'm going to discuss how my school is similar to all of these. So teachers here are extremely focused on testing because unlike in Singapore, where they're tested at the end of secondary and at the end of primary, basically from grade 6 onwards, every year they have a high-stakes test here. And if the kids don't pass, they, like one out of any of the exams that they have each year, they fail and they have to repeat that grade. So it's pretty high stakes. Basically, the assessment takes the form of multiple choice assessments. Once again, not the greatest indicator of that. We are frankly trying to change all of that, which is really cool. Kind of like a bit of a grassroots movement here to try and move away from that. I'm hoping to get something out of this course to help me with some literature to help me push that agenda, because I'd really like to move it away from that. Anyway, so in BASIS, the expectation is not just to score good grades, it's to get like straight A's and 100%. There's competition between the schools regarding the data from these tests that we have. Teachers are compared, schools are compared, teachers are fired. Like I said, students can have to repeat grades if they don't. It's highly competitive. I've had conversations with teachers where they don't want to share strategies or resources because they believe it gives them an edge over another teacher, which is scary. Is it successful, this style? Well, to be honest with you, our math results are intimidating. They're through the roof. Like, we have students who... most students, I think, bar one or two, are in the blue bracket of the MAPS testing, which is like the top percentile part. It's crazy. And our English proficiency is not bad, considering that we're a second language school based in China. It's pretty competitive, quite competitive. Not as good as the math, obviously. That's just absolutely insane. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to argue success with, say, MAP data, which is pretty international, then yeah, it's pretty good. And our internal exams are also good. Is that healthy for our students, that level of stress? Absolutely not. Do we holistically develop our kids? Not really. But I don't know, people pay to come here, so I assume that's what they want out of this. We try to help the kids out, but I'm not sure that's, the focus is still obviously on the academics. So I'd like to contrast this with my last school, this rigidity, teaching towards the exams, multiple choice exams. I'd like to contrast that with my last school in Azerbaijan, which was a PYP school, very loose. It was just in its infancy. Still, we did some really amazing stuff there regarding assessment and curriculum, but still very, very polar opposite. Very open-ended. We had like summative assessments and long-term projects for assessments. We had a whole slew of other continuously running assessments, self-assessments, peer assessments, all that sort of stuff. Not done particularly well because a lot of our teachers weren't really trained, but still not bad start for that school. One of the things I'd like to talk about that was interesting about my last school is that we actually got rid of this grade system because we didn't want students to be focused on like getting 5 out of 5, which was the maximum they could get in the Azerbaijani system. So we actually completely eradicated the grading numbers and the grading system. And in the primary school, what we did was just have kids, we just sent home a report card which had the standards for, say, math or whatever subject. And then we had them assigned a needs more work, approaching the standard, meet the standard, and exceed the standard. And basically, that really led to a cultural shift in the parent body to focus not just, and the students, and in turn the teachers, I suppose, to not just focus on the 5. They focused then on the whole, the standards themselves, what they could do to improve those standards. And yeah, kind of like what MAP does. MAP does that a little bit too. Well, more than a little bit, but MAP does that pretty well. I'm just going to quote my last quote here from Ratnam Lim and Tam, though, which says that, and I'd like to apply this to my school, my last school in Azerbaijan. It says that while policymakers seek to convey precise meanings of educational policies, parents, school leaders, and teachers may experience and construe the policies in other ways. And that really, in a nutshell, encapsulates what I think was wrong with my last PYP school and with a lot of IB schools in general. Because outside of the DP program, the policies and the curricula is purposely open-ended to allow for variation, individualization within countries, schools, down to teachers and the student levels. Now, at first I viewed that as a weakness because I thought it seems disorganized and you don't really know what everyone is doing and what's going on. But that's only really because of that situation where I was in. I believe that it's actually a strength of the IB to have that. Now that I've looked at this other system where I'm in, which is rigid, teaching towards a test, and then they pass the test. Like the IB system that I was last in, even though it was a disorganized version of the IB, was just a way better system in general. But frankly, what will cause an IB school to live or die is its coordinators. And this is sometimes a position which is underrated in especially new fledgling IB schools like my last school. They didn't quite understand the value of that coordinator role because that coordinator is really essential to making sure that the whole thing goes together. It's actually the reason I started studying this is because I wanted to be a PYP coordinator, and yet here I am in this exam-driven multiple choice situation. But anyway, pays the bills. Okay, so the last thing I'd like to talk about, or the second thing I'd like to talk about is a bit of caution. I said that I'd go with comparison and caution. So O'Dwyer, Wang and Shields, in the bluntness and calculating logic of mathematicians, warn of the dangers of using standardized testing and the large-scale data that comes with it comparatively, which is what I've been doing, comparing. So they actually say that comparing using these large-scale data tests can be a bit dangerous. Basically, they examined the US, Korea, and Singapore, Singapore, and Japan's data from an international math examination, and they found that the teachers in their practice explained very little of the variability in the test scores, even in the cases where particular instructional practices were positively and significantly related to achievement. They argue that using data comparatively from studies that do not include a measurement of students' prior achievement, cultural context, systemic structure, pedagogical practice, and teacher and classroom observations, it's problematic. I would further argue that many of these factors are impossible to quantifiably measure or even sufficiently define, which significantly hinders the data's validity there as well. What they argue, interestingly, which I really like, is they talked about how valid comparisons between some countries maybe hampered by the existence of supplementary shadow education systems. It sounds cool, like a Ninja Turtle or something system, but yeah, these shadow education systems basically operate in parallel to those sampled in international comparative studies. So basically there's just a scene here, especially in China, where a lot of our kids are performing really well because they spend all day after school studying, like quite a large amount of the time. So yeah, any kind of data collection that you do, you need to like put in a lot of factors other than what's than the large-scale data itself. Because if you just looked at our basis data, it's sure our math scores are crazy through the roof, but our kids are also spending 2 or 3 hours every evening in private math classes. So there's that to factor in. All right, I'd just like to finish on a personal note. Something that's been really bothering me about assessment recently has been the pandemic. It's kind of rearing its ugly head in China again. Huber and Helm point out that many countries don't really know how the pandemic is going to affect data, affect how we deal with education. And yeah, I mean, in our current context, the school's been threatened with lockdown several times now. I'm actually going to go get tested right after this. It's been my 4th or 5th time I've had this swab test recently in about the last 2 or 3 weeks. But yeah, all of our data for our next set of exams, which is super important, like I said, it's whether kids pass or fail, is going to be online now. And we have no real way of assessing whether or not kids are going to be cheating or like how valid that data is, because we can't be in the room with them while they're doing it. For those of the kids who, several of them, like let's say many of them will be here because they're boarding students. So, I mean, how fair it is on the kids at home versus them is going to, unfairly, I think, affect their scores. So, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things affecting assessment and a lot of things affecting a comparison of students, systems, and policies and strategies in general. So, yeah, in summary, I just wanted to compare a little bit my current situation and my last one, and caution against comparing. All right, bye guys, see you later.